The military history professor was playing audio recordings from Vietnam, real helicopter sounds from 1968. The old janitor working in the hallway suddenly stopped. His hands began shaking, his breathing quickened. He gripped his cleaning cart for support. The professor saw the man standing in the doorway, face pale, eyes staring into the distance. That sound had taken him back 50 years. The professor immediately turned off the audio and approached him. "Are you all right?" he asked. The old man took slow, deep breaths and said, "Those sounds, I can never forget them." Welcome to Unsung Heroes Stories. Before we begin this powerful story about memory, trauma, and the weight of history, tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe that some lessons can only be learned through experience, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Riverside University sat on a sprawling campus in Columbus, Ohio, its red brick buildings and tree-lined paths giving it the classic American college atmosphere. Founded in 1887, it had weathered world wars, economic depressions, and cultural revolutions while maintaining its commitment to education and research. The history department occupied Morrison Hall, a 3-story building that had housed academics for over a century. Its hallways were lined with portraits of distinguished professors, glass cases displaying historical artifacts, and bulletin boards covered with announcements for lectures, conferences, and student activities. Every morning at 6 a.m., before the professors arrived and students began their rush to early classes, the hallways were cleaned by the custodial staff. Most were younger folks working their way through school or older immigrants seeking steady work. But one of them was different. Thomas Morrison had been cleaning these same hallways for 15 years. 62 years old, thin-billed, graying hair kept short. He wore the standard blue custodial uniform and moved with quiet efficiency through his assigned floors. 3rd floor, Morrison Hall. Same route every day. Tom was known for being reliable and unobtrusive. He arrived on time, did his job thoroughly, and rarely engaged in conversation beyond polite greetings. The professors knew him by sight, students barely noticed him, and even his fellow custodial workers didn't know much about his life outside the university. What they didn't know was that Thomas Morrison had habits that most janitors didn't develop. The way he instinctively scanned rooms for potential threats when he entered, how he positioned himself near exits when cleaning around groups of people. The fact that certain sounds, helicopters, fireworks, even loud motorcycles, could make him pause and listen intently, his body tensing in ways that suggested training rather than fear. Habits learned during 2 tours in Vietnam as a combat infantry soldier with the 25th Infantry Division. Dr. Michael Richardson had been teaching military history at Riverside University for 8 years. 34 years old, Ph.D. from Georgetown, he'd specialized in 20th century American conflicts with particular expertise in the Vietnam War. His courses were popular among students. He had a talent for bringing historical events to life through detailed narratives and primary source materials. Richardson was passionate about his subject matter, but he'd never served in the military himself. His knowledge came from extensive research, interviews with veterans, and countless hours studying documents, photographs, and audio recordings. He was thorough, respectful, and always careful to honor the experiences of those who had actually fought. His Vietnam War course was offered every spring semester. Students would spend 12 weeks examining the political context, military strategies, major battles, and ultimate consequences of America's longest war. Richardson used everything from government documents to soldiers' letters home to give students a comprehensive understanding of the conflict. One teaching tool he'd found particularly effective was audio recordings, radio chatter from combat operations, helicopter sounds, artillery fire. These recordings, obtained from military archives and veteran organizations, helped students understand the sensory reality of warfare beyond what they could read in textbooks. Richardson had noticed the janitor who worked the third floor. The man was always professional, never intrusive, but sometimes Richardson caught him pausing when certain topics were being discussed. Nothing dramatic, just a moment's hesitation before continuing his work. Richardson had assumed the man might have lost family members in various conflicts, as many Americans had. He'd never imagined that Thomas Morrison had been there himself. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m., Military History, 340, the Vietnam War. 23 students sat in the classroom as Dr. Richardson prepared for his lecture on the Tet Offensive of 1968. This was always one of the most challenging topics to teach: the complexity of the military action, the impact on American public opinion, and the lasting effects on policy and strategy. Richardson had arranged his materials carefully: maps showing the scope of the attacks, photographs from Saigon and Hue, and audio recordings that would help students understand the chaos and intensity of urban combat. Today, we're examining one of the most significant military actions of the Vietnam conflict, Richardson began. The Tet Offensive changed how Americans understood the war and ultimately influenced its outcome. To help you grasp the reality of what soldiers experienced, I'm going to play some authentic audio from the battle for Saigon. Outside in the hallway, Thomas Morrison was following his regular routine. Empty trash cans, mop the floors, dust the bulletin boards. He'd done this same circuit thousands of times. The work was peaceful, meditative even. It kept his hands busy and his mind focused on simple, manageable tasks. Richardson's voice carried into the hallway through the partially open classroom door. Tom usually paid little attention to the lectures. He'd heard hundreds over the years, covering everything from ancient Rome to World War II. But something about today's topic made him pause. The attacks began at 12:15 a.m. on January 30th, 1968, Richardson was explaining. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched coordinated strikes across South Vietnam. In Saigon alone, enemy forces attacked the presidential palace, the radio station, and the American embassy. Tom found himself slowing down, his mop moving automatically while his mind shifted to a different time and place. Richardson continued, "To understand the intensity of the urban fighting, I want you to listen to this recording. It's actual radio communication between American forces during the first hours of the attack. That's when Richardson pressed play on his audio system. The sound that filled the hallway was unmistakable. The distinctive thwop-thwop-thwop of UH-1 helicopter rotor blades, followed by radio chatter crackling with static and urgency. Charlie 6, this is Dustoff 2, incoming with wounded, need immediate LZ clearance. Roger, Dustoff 2, be advised LZ is still taking sporadic fire. Copy that, Charlie 6, we're coming in hot. The sound of automatic weapons fire in the background, then an explosion that caused the radio to cut out momentarily before reconnecting. Thomas Morrison stopped moving entirely. The mop handle slipped from his suddenly trembling hands and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed off the hallway walls, but Tom didn't hear it. He was hearing something else entirely. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His vision seemed to narrow, the hallway fading around the edges. The present moment slipped away as 55 years collapsed into nothing. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in a quiet university hallway in Ohio. He was crouched behind a concrete barrier in Saigon, January 30th, 1968, age 19, watching tracer rounds streak through the darkness while helicopters struggled to evacuate wounded soldiers from a rooftop landing zone that was supposed to be secure but wasn't. The radio chatter from Richardson's classroom merged with his memories. "We need covering fire on that building. Medic! Medic! Where the hell is our air support?" Tom's legs felt weak. He reached out for his cleaning cart, gripping it so tightly his knuckles went white. His heart was pounding, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was or what year it was. From inside the classroom, Dr. Richardson was explaining the tactical significance of the audio they were hearing, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Dr. Richardson had paused the audio to make a point about communication challenges during urban combat when he noticed movement in the doorway. The janitor, who usually worked this floor, was standing there, but something was wrong. The man was pale, gripping his cart, and appeared to be in distress. Richardson immediately stopped his lecture and walked toward the door. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The classroom fell quiet. Students turned to see what was happening. Thomas Morrison was fighting to regain his composure. The sounds had stopped, but the memories were still vivid. He tried to speak, but found his voice shaky. I'm sorry," he managed. "Those sounds." Richardson understood immediately. He'd read enough accounts from veterans to recognize what he was seeing. "Would you like to sit down? Can I get you some water?" Tom took a deep breath, trying to ground himself in the present. "No, I should get back to work." But Richardson wasn't going to let him just walk away. Something about the man's reaction told him this wasn't just emotional distress, it was recognition. "Have you heard those sounds before?" Richardson asked gently. Tom looked at him, then at the students who were watching with curiosity and concern. He'd spent 15 years being invisible in these hallways. Now, suddenly, he was the center of attention. "Yes," he said quietly. "I was there." The classroom was completely silent. Richardson studied the janitor's face more carefully. The age was right. If he'd served in Vietnam, he'd be in his early 70s now. The reaction to the audio had been too specific, too immediate to be anything but personal experience. "You served in Vietnam?" Tom nodded slowly. "2 tours, 25th Infantry Division." Dr. Richardson made a decision that would change both their lives. Would you be willing to come in and talk to my students?" Tom's first instinct was to decline. He'd spent decades avoiding conversations about the war. The memories were still too raw, too complicated. And what did he know about teaching college students? But something about Richardson's respectful tone and the genuine interest in the students' faces made him reconsider. "I don't know," Tom said. "I'm not good at speaking to groups." "You don't have to give a lecture," Richardson assured him. "But if you're comfortable with it, maybe you could just share what that audio recording meant to you." These students have read about the Tet Offensive, but they've never heard from someone who was actually there. The students were watching this exchange with fascination. Most of them had never met a Vietnam veteran, let alone one who'd been present during one of the war's most significant battles. A young woman in the front row named Sarah spoke up. "We'd really like to hear from you, if you're okay with it." Tom looked around the room at their faces. They weren't looking at him with pity or curiosity about his reaction to the sounds. They were looking at him with respect, as someone who had lived through history they were trying to understand. "Okay," he said finally, "but I'm not sure what you want to know." Richardson quickly cleared a chair at the front of the room. "Please, sit down. Take your time." Tom hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the classroom. It felt strange to be on this side of the academic environment after 15 years of cleaning around the edges of it. "Those helicopter sounds," Richardson said as Tom settled into the chair. "They triggered something specific for you." Tom nodded. Dust-off helicopters, medical evacuation, the radio chatter you played. That was exactly how it sounded when they were trying to get wounded soldiers out of hot LZs. Hot LZs? Asked a student. Landing zones under fire, Tom explained. During Tet, we had wounded men on rooftops, and the helicopters had to come in knowing they'd be shot at. Those pilots, they were incredibly brave. For the next hour, Thomas Morrison did something he hadn't done in decades. He talked about the war, not the sanitized version from history books or the dramatized version from movies, the real version. The version that included the weight of equipment in tropical heat, the smell of diesel fuel and cordite, the sound of wounded friends calling for their mothers. He told them about arriving in Vietnam in December 1967. A 19-year-old kid from rural Ohio who thought the war would be over by the time his tour ended. About learning to sleep through artillery fire and waking up instantly at the sound of enemy movement. He described the morning of January 30th, 1968, when the Tet Offensive began. How their base camp outside Saigon had come under attack before dawn, and how they'd been rushed into the city to help defend against the coordinated assault. The thing about urban combat, Tom said, is that everything you trained for changes. In the jungle, you know where the enemy is supposed to be. In a city, they could be anywhere, any window, any doorway, any rooftop. A student named Marcus raised his hand. Were you scared? Tom considered the question. Every day. But you learn to function with fear. You have to, because other people are depending on you. He talked about the helicopter evacuation that the audio recording had captured, how his unit had been tasked with securing a landing zone on top of a government building while wounded soldiers were airlifted out. That particular day we lost 3 men, Tom said quietly. Good men. They were trying to cover the evacuation when sniper fire came from a building across the street. The classroom was completely silent. Even Dr. Richardson, who had studied these events extensively, found himself learning details that weren't in any of his textbooks. Sarah asked, "How did you deal with losing friends?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. You don't, really. You just carry it. Some guys wrote letters, some guys talked about it. I just got quiet. Is that why you don't talk about the war? Another student asked. Partly, but also because. Tom paused, choosing his words carefully. Because when you come home, people don't really want to hear about it. They want to support the troops, but they don't want to know what the troops actually went through. Dr. Richardson found himself in the unusual position of learning alongside his students. Tom's first-hand account was filling in gaps that no amount of research could have provided. The audio recording we played, Richardson said, you mentioned it was exactly accurate. How important was radio communication during urban fighting? It was everything, Tom replied. In the jungle you could use hand signals, whispers. In the city, with all the noise and chaos, radio was the only way to coordinate. But the enemy was listening too, so you had to use code words, short transmissions. Tom explained tactical details that weren't in any military manual. How soldiers learned to move through buildings, how they identified civilians versus combatants, how they dealt with the psychological stress of fighting in populated areas. A student named David asked, "Do you think the history books get it right?" Tom thought about that. They get the facts right, dates, places, numbers, but they can't really capture what it felt like. The confusion, the noise, the way time seemed to slow down during firefights. What's missing from how we teach this? Richardson asked. The human part, Tom said. History focuses on strategy and politics and outcomes, but war is really about 19-year-old kids making split-second decisions that they'll think about for the rest of their lives. As the class period neared its end, The dynamic in the room had completely changed. The students weren't just learning about historical events anymore. They were learning about human experience. And Dr. Richardson was gaining insights that would influence how he taught the subject for years to come. "Would you be willing to come back?" Richardson asked. "Maybe we could set up a more formal discussion." Tom hesitated. The experience had been emotionally draining, but also strangely therapeutic. For the first time in decades, people had listened to his story without judgment, without trying to fit it into political narratives about whether the war was right or wrong. "Maybe," he said, "if you think it would help them understand." "It would help all of us understand," Richardson replied. Word spread quickly through the history department about what had happened in Richardson's class. Within days, other professors were asking if Tom would be willing to speak to their students as well. The university's oral history project reached out, hoping to record his experiences for their archive. Tom found himself in an unexpected position. After 15 years of invisibility, he was suddenly being seen as a valuable resource. It was overwhelming, but also validating in a way he hadn't anticipated. Dr. Richardson arranged for Tom to have a more flexible work schedule that would allow him to participate in classes when he felt comfortable doing so. The university administration, once they learned about his background, were eager to support what they saw as an invaluable educational opportunity. But not every day was easy. Sometimes the memories were too close to the surface. Sometimes the questions from students, well-meaning as they were, touched on experiences that Tom wasn't ready to share. Richardson learned to read the signs, to know when to steer conversations in different directions, or when to give Tom space to collect himself. The most meaningful moment came during a class discussion about PTSD and veteran reintegration. A student asked Tom directly about his own struggles with coming home. "The war ended for everyone else in 1975, Tom said. "For those of us who were there, it never really ends. You just learn to live with it." "How?" the student pressed. Tom looked around the room at these young faces, so eager to understand something that couldn't really be understood without experiencing it. "You find purpose," he said finally. "You find ways to make the experience mean something. For a long time, I thought the only purpose was just surviving. But maybe helping you understand is purpose too." 6 months later, Riverside University held its annual Veterans Day ceremony. For years, it had been a modest event, a few speeches, a moment of silence, recognition of faculty and staff who had served. This year was different. Dr. Richardson had worked with the university administration to organize a more comprehensive program. The centerpiece was a panel discussion featuring local veterans from different conflicts, including Tom Morrison. The auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, staff, and community members filled every seat. For many in the audience, this would be their first opportunity to hear directly from someone who had served in Vietnam. Tom sat on the stage with 3 other veterans, a World War II veteran in his 90s, a Gulf War veteran, and a woman who had served in Afghanistan. Each would have time to share their experiences and answer questions. When Tom's turn came, he stood up slowly and looked out at the crowd. A year ago, the thought of speaking to this many people would have terrified him. Now, he felt ready. "My name is Thomas Morrison," he began. "For 15 years, I've cleaned the hallways of this university. Most of you have probably seen me around, but never knew my story. I didn't talk about it because I thought it wasn't important anymore." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I've learned that stories matter. History isn't just about dates and places. It's about people, real people who lived through events that shaped our world. And if my story can help you understand that history a little better, then maybe that's the most important thing I can do. Tom went on to share some of the same experiences he'd discussed in Richardson's classroom, but with more confidence now. He talked about the complexity of the war, the difficulty of coming home, and the importance of learning from the past. When the program ended, Tom was surrounded by students and community members who wanted to thank him, to ask questions, to share their own family stories about the war. Dr. Richardson watched from the side of the auditorium, reflecting on how much had changed since that morning when helicopter sounds had triggered a flashback in his hallway. Thomas Morrison continued working at Riverside University, but his role had evolved far beyond custodial duties. He became a regular guest speaker in history classes, participated in the oral history project, and mentored students who were interested in military history. The university created a special recognition program for employee veterans, ensuring that others who had served wouldn't remain invisible the way Tom had for so many years. Dr. Richardson's teaching was transformed by his partnership with Tom. His classes became known throughout the university for their unique combination of academic rigor and first-hand experience. Students would often comment that they learned as much from the quiet janitor as they did from their professor. But perhaps the most significant change was in Tom himself. For decades, he had carried the weight of his war experiences alone. Now, he had found a way to transform that weight into something meaningful, a bridge between past and present, between experience and understanding. On quiet mornings, when he was cleaning the hallways before classes began, Tom would sometimes pause outside Richardson's classroom and listen to the lectures, not because they triggered painful memories anymore, but because they reminded him that history, real history, was being taught there. History that included his story, his voice, his truth. The sounds of helicopters still affected him sometimes. They probably always would. But now, instead of taking him back to a place of trauma, they reminded him of something else, the importance of bearing witness, of speaking truth, and of ensuring that the experiences of those who served are never forgotten or reduced to simple narratives. Thomas Morrison had spent 15 years being invisible. Now, finally, he was seen. So tell us, have you ever encountered someone like Thomas Morrison? Someone whose quiet presence carried decades of history and experience? Someone whose story remained untold until the right moment brought it to light? Share their story in the comments. Tell us their name. Honor the quiet witnesses who walk among us, carrying the weight of history in their memories. Because at Unsung Hero Stories, we believe that the most important lessons often come from the most unexpected teachers. Sometimes they're professors with advanced degrees. Sometimes they're janitors with advanced experience. Subscribe if this story moved you. We share these forgotten voices every week. And remember, next time you see someone doing humble work around you, look twice. You might be standing next to someone who lived through moments that shaped our world.